A little girl, standing beside a man twice her size. She didn't smile. She didn't wave like the other children. She just looked up at the royal guard and gave him a secret rescue signal. He saw it, held his position for several long seconds. Then, without a word, he broke protocol, left his post, and followed her home. What he walked into moments later will leave you shaken to your core. Before we show you what happened next, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. And make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon on. Because this isn't just a story about tradition or duty. It's about one little girl, one silent signal, and a royal guard who knew exactly what it meant. The courtyard outside St. James's Palace had a stillness that morning, the kind of crisp, ceremonial quiet, broken only by the occasional shuffling of feet and the flutter of Union Jacks clutched by tourists. Guards stood as they always did, statues in scarlet and black, unmoved by laughter, cameras, or stray commentary. Staff Sergeant Miles Carrick had been posted there more times than he could count, but the weight of the bearskin still sat the same way on his shoulders, heavy, proud. At 39, he was one of the older guards, still rotating through ceremonial posts. Most assumed his presence meant he was slower than the younger lads. They had no idea what they were looking at. He stood tall, left foot slightly forward, SA-80 rifle angled down across his chest, boot heels planted square into polished stone. His eyes, though still and forward-facing, absorbed everything. A royal guard wasn't supposed to look around, but there were ways, micro-glances, peripheral sweeps, training that never really left you, no matter how many medals were packed away in a box at home. Most of the crowd today was light, midweek tourists, parents, couples, and a cluster of school children whispering among themselves. There was a small girl among them, maybe 6 or 7 years old, standing very still. That in itself wasn't unusual. Children often froze, unsure how to act around the soldiers. But this one wasn't gazing in awe. She wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't smiling. She was watching. Carrick's eyes passed over her once, moved on, then returned subtly. Something about her posture gnawed at him. Her hands were clenched tightly in front of her, a far cry from the waving or bouncing you'd expect from someone her age. She stood beside a tall man in a charcoal hoodie and faded jeans, one hand resting firmly on her shoulder. Firmly was putting it mildly. Even at a distance, Carrick could see the difference between a guiding hand and a restraining grip. This man didn't glance down at the girl. He looked out over the crowd instead, laughing loudly at some joke he made to a passing couple, his accent local, South London maybe, and called her his niece Emma like it was a badge of honour. But the girl didn't react. She didn't smile or tug at his hand or roll her eyes like children often do when embarrassed by adult behaviour. She just stood there, silent, rigid. Carrick scanned again, slower this time, under the guise of a weight shift from foot to foot. She was looking directly at him now, not through him, at him. Their eyes met, briefly, and in that second something in Carrick's chest tugged, a kind of unspoken electricity, a whisper in the blood that said, "This isn't right." The girl raised her hand slowly, almost imperceptibly, arm out, thumb tucked in. Then she folded her fingers over it. Carrick didn't blink, but something inside him stopped cold. It wasn't a wave. It wasn't a stretch, it was a signal, a specific one, and she'd just given it straight to a royal guard. The distress signal wasn't something most people would recognise. It had started circulating in awareness campaigns a few years back, quietly, almost too quietly. A universal, silent gesture for help. Palm out, thumb tucked, fingers wrapped over. The sign meant, "I'm in danger. I can't speak. Please help me." Carrick had first seen it on a Ministry of Defence bulletin, part of a wider initiative to train armed forces and police to spot non-verbal cues, especially from children. He'd paid attention. Not everyone had. Now here it was. Not in training. Not on a screen. Real. He kept his eyes fixed ahead, resisting every instinct to turn and react. The protocol was strict. A royal guard on post could not break formation without provocation or direct orders. But protocol wasn't designed for moments like this. The man was still talking loudly, narrating his niece's first visit to the palace, cracking jokes about how the guards were just for show. His tone was off, too performative, like he wanted people to believe the lie he was spinning before anyone asked questions. Carrick's jaw tightened. The girl hadn't moved since the signal, but she hadn't dropped her gaze either. She was still watching him. And then she did it again, slower this time. A clear repeat. Palm out, thumb tucked, fingers closed. This wasn't hesitation. It was desperation. Carrick shifted his weight and activated the discreet lapel mic clipped beneath his collar, a private channel that ran back to the palace command station. His voice, when it came, was low and even. Station 1, visual on potential child distress. Code Victor 3. Request cover rotation and protocol override, pending situational review. There was a pause. A moment where the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then came the reply. Copy Station 1. 2-minute cover inbound. Proceed with caution. Carrick allowed himself one deep breath. The kind you take before doing something that could get you suspended, or worse. The man had turned slightly now, guiding the girl back from the barrier. Carrick noted how his hand never left her shoulder. She didn't flinch, but she didn't walk willingly either. It was a slow pull, the way you might move a child who'd been told not to speak. Carrick didn't look directly again, didn't need to. He timed the motion precisely. As the cover guard rounded the edge of the palace courtyard, taking the next assigned position on duty, Carrick slowly peeled away from formation. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Phones raised instantly. It wasn't common to see a guard move, let alone leave his post. But Carrick didn't care. He walked with purpose, measured, calculated steps through the wrought iron gates, boots echoing on the stone. By the time anyone thought to follow him with a lens, he was gone. The man and girl were crossing the edge of the roundabout toward the Green Park station entrance. Carrick followed, weaving casually between pedestrians, never closing the gap too quickly. His uniform was still on. He stood out. But that didn't matter now. His eyes were fixed on the girl's narrow back and the man who walked half a step ahead of her, too fast for comfort. They turned left down a busier street, then paused at a bus stop. Carrick slowed, adjusting his path to duck behind a tourist group. The next bus rolled up. The doors opened. The man boarded first. The girl hesitated. Carrick caught one last look. Her small face turned toward the crowd, lips parted slightly, not crying, but close. Then she stepped on. Carrick didn't think. He followed. The doors hissed shut behind him with a hollow seal. Carrick grabbed one of the vertical poles near the rear entrance, his gloved hand steady despite the adrenaline creeping into his chest. The bus jolted forward. He didn't sit. Neither did the man. They stood on opposite ends of the aisle, Carrick at the back, the man holding the rail just above the girl's head a few seats ahead. She'd taken the window seat, small legs dangling above the floor, her back straight as a ruler. The man turned once, as if checking for familiar faces or unwanted attention. Carrick kept his head angled slightly away, as if he were just another uniform heading back from duty. His presence wasn't common on public transport, but it wasn't illegal either. Not yet. The man didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he didn't care. For the next 25 minutes, Carrick stood in silence, watching the city blur past. Office buildings gave way to terrace houses. The tourists thinned. By the time the bus crossed into South London, the air felt different, less like ceremony, more like reality. The girl hadn't looked back once. The bus hissed again as it came to a stop near a row of dated, low-rise flats, 3-story buildings with cracked stone steps and overgrown hedges creeping past the brickwork. A rusted fence lined the property. 2 boys played football on the footpath nearby, stopping only to glance at the man and girl as they stepped off. Carrick waited one stop longer. Then he got off, circled around and crossed the street. From a safe distance, behind a row of half-dead hedges, he watched the man fumble with a gate, then lead the girl inside. She hesitated at the door. He pulled her gently but firmly by the wrist, muttering something inaudible. The door slammed behind them. Carrick noted the flat number, 4th from the end, 1st floor, curtains drawn. No sound. He reached for his comm unit again and pressed into the private emergency line patched through to law enforcement. "This is Staff Sergeant Carrick, Buckingham Detail. I'm off duty, but following up on a distress alert flagged from ceremonial post. Child welfare concern, potential abduction. Current address, 22 Lakenhall Road, Unit 1B. Requesting immediate civilian law enforcement and social support presence. Possible trafficking or coercion. Situation stable for now." The voice on the other end was quick but professional. "Copy that. Units inbound. ETA 12 minutes. Remain on site. Do not engage unless safety is compromised." Understood. Carrick lowered the mic. He took position across the street, half shielded behind a stack of forgotten pallets beside a skip. The flats loomed ahead in the grey afternoon light, windows smudged with age, concrete steps darkened from years of rain and grime. A small satellite dish clung to the edge of the roof, bent awkwardly, as if the whole place was holding its breath. 10 minutes passed. A woman exited a neighbouring unit with a bag of groceries. Carrick intercepted politely. "Ma'am, sorry to trouble you. Do you recognise the man who just went inside Unit 1B? She blinked at the uniform, then glanced toward the building. "Tall bloke, always wears that dark hoodie. Yeah, I've seen him around, keeps to himself mostly." "Ever seen him with a little girl before?" She frowned. "No, never." Carrick nodded once. "Thank you." Sirens didn't come screaming in. That wasn't how child welfare calls worked. But a dark blue unmarked car pulled up quietly just before the 12-minute mark. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, along with a plainclothes woman clutching a slim satchel, the kind social workers carried. Carrick briefed them in concise detail. Names still unknown. Girl gave the distress signal twice. No verbal confirmation. The man claimed she was his niece in front of tourists. The officer in charge, a grizzled inspector named Rourke, gave him a tight nod. "You've done more than most would have. We'll take it from here." But Carrick didn't move. "I'd like to remain close." She made the signal to me. Rourke studied him for a second, then nodded again. "Stay behind us. No engagement unless directed." The team moved in, calm, rehearsed. Carrick followed, 2 steps behind. The knock echoed off the old wood like a slow drumbeat. Inside, something shifted. There was a long pause after the knock, too long for someone with nothing to hide. Carrick stood just behind Inspector Rourke, his eyes scanning the upper window and then the doorframe. The building's age showed in every detail. Chipped red paint on the railing, worn-out security intercoms with taped-up buttons, and a smell in the stairwell that reminded him of mould and something older, like old newspapers and silence. Finally, the door opened. The same man stood there, hoodie off now, hair tousled like he'd just rolled out of bed, a forced expression of sleepy confusion on his face. "Can I help you?" "Inspector Rourke, Metropolitan Police," the officer said calmly, holding up his ID. "We received a call related to a possible child welfare concern. Mind if we come in for a quick chat?" The man hesitated, just a blink, but then smiled, thin and brittle. "Sure. It's about my niece, I assume. Emma, we were just napping. Long day at the museums." Carrick clocked every word. The inflection, the carefully planted detail, the unnecessary context. The girl, Lucy, stood behind him in the hallway now, barely visible. Her head poked just past the corner, eyes scanning the officers, then landing on Carrick. Recognition flickered, but she said nothing. "May we come in and speak with her?" Rourke asked. "She's really shy," the man said quickly. "I mean, she doesn't even speak to most of my friends. Just a quiet one." I understand, Rourke replied. This is Ms. Carter. She's with Child Services. She's here to speak to your niece in private. It's standard procedure. Won't take long. The man's smile tightened. Do you have a warrant? Ms. Carter stepped forward smoothly, voice calm but firm. We don't need one at this stage. You're not under arrest. But when a minor is reported in distress, we're required to ensure their safety. That includes a one-on-one welfare check. The man looked back at Lucy. You want to talk to them, sweetheart? Lucy didn't respond. Rourke tried again. Sir, if you continue to obstruct, we'll be required to escalate this. It's better for everyone if we handle this respectfully. The man raised both hands, backing up slightly. Fine, come in. Don't want trouble. They stepped inside. The flat was cramped. One bedroom, one window open just an inch. Stale air, thick with the smell of reheated food and industrial cleaning fluid. A small TV played cartoons on mute in the background. Lucy's school shoes were by the couch, but there were no other toys. No school bag. No family photos. Nothing that said, "Child lives here." Ms. Carter sat with Lucy on the worn sofa, lowering her voice to a hush. Carrick couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language. Lucy didn't flinch, didn't cry. But she kept glancing toward the hallway, toward the man standing just out of view. Carrick shifted to block her line of sight, giving her just a little more safety in the room. Ms. Carter gently placed her hand on Lucy's and whispered something again. Lucy nodded once. Meanwhile, the man leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded, jaw twitching slightly. She's got her mum's temper, that one, he muttered. Runs in the family. Where is her mum? Rourke asked casually. Abroad. Spain. Holiday. Left Emma with me for the week. I got the messages to prove it. We'll need to see them. The man pulled out a cheap smartphone and fumbled through it. His hands shook, subtly, but Carrick didn't miss it. Battery's low. Just give me a minute. Rourke didn't respond. From the couch, Ms. Carter stood slowly and looked toward the officers. Her eyes said everything. We'll need to speak with you outside, sir, she said gently. The man blinked. Why? Carrick stepped forward now for the first time. His voice was calm, low. Because your story's already cracking. The man froze. Lucy didn't. She slid off the couch and walked straight to Ms. Carter. This time, when she looked back at Carrick, she gave the faintest nod. Carrick returned it, barely a blink. But it was enough. The courtyard outside the flat had filled slightly with the quiet presence of backup units. 2 plainclothes officers, positioned discreetly at the stairwell, a marked cruiser tucked just beyond the estate's gated entrance. They weren't here for a raid, not yet. But the tension in the air had begun to shift. Inside, Inspector Rourke kept his tone conversational, but Carrick could feel the undertow tightening. You said your name was Mark Withers, correct? Rourke asked, reviewing the man's ID. That's right, he nodded. Uncle to Emma Withers, brother to Angela Withers, her mum. And she left the country. When, exactly? 2 weeks ago. Business trip. She works in pharmaceuticals, you know how it is. Carrick said nothing. He'd heard more credible stories from half-drunk tourists outside the palace. Funny, Rourke said mildly, because when we checked the name Angela Withers in the system, we didn't find a single outbound record for that date range. Not through Heathrow, not Gatwick, not even the ferries. Mark's brow furrowed, lips parting as if a retort had been halfway there and then abandoned. He tried to shrug. Could have used a different name. Her company sometimes books weird tickets. Privacy reasons. Rourke didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Ms. Carter, who was now holding Lucy's hand just beside the door. Lucy, she said softly, do you know your mum's phone number or where she works? The girl hesitated, then nodded. Do you know this man? She looked down, then shook her head. That pause, that tiny silence, was the crack that opened everything. Rourke turned back to Mark. You've claimed guardianship of a child who now says she doesn't know you. Can you explain that? Mark's composure broke just slightly. He moved to step forward too quickly. Carrick's hand instinctively shifted to his belt, not to draw, just to be ready. The other officers noticed too. One moved toward the rear of the room. All right, look, Mark snapped. She's confused. Kids don't always remember things right. I've been taking care of her all week. She just needs rest. You lot come in here flashing badges, scaring her. Of course she's going to clam up. She knew exactly what she was doing at the palace, Carrick said, speaking now for the first time since stepping inside. Mark turned to him. Who are you again? Her bodyguard? Carrick didn't blink. I'm the reason she's not still standing outside St. James's Palace, wondering if anyone would listen. Mark sneered, but behind the anger was fear, real now, gnawing at the edges. Lucy, Miss Carter asked gently, do you know where your school bag is? The girl pointed toward the bedroom. May I go in? Miss Carter asked Mark. He didn't respond, but he also didn't stop her. Carrick followed, standing guard at the bedroom door. Inside, the room was nearly bare, cheap sheets, empty dresser, a mattress pushed against the wall, but under the bed, half hidden by a jacket, was a faded pink school bag. Miss Carter pulled it out, unzipped it slowly. Inside was a small ID card clipped to a notebook. Lucy Grace Withers, Year 3, Lambeth Primary School. The name matched the one the girl had given, not the alias the man had fed the crowd. Back in the front room, the officers waited silently as Miss Carter returned and handed Rourke the card. Thank you, he said. Mark tried to interject again. Look, maybe I got the last name wrong, all right? I'm tired. You ever try watching a kid for 2 weeks? I did my best. No, Rourke said firmly, stepping toward him now. You lied. Repeatedly. And now we have proof this child is not legally under your care. That bag wasn't packed. It was hidden. She wasn't sleeping. She was afraid. Mark backed up toward the kitchen again, jaw tight, hands twitching at his sides. Sir, Rourke warned, don't. But the man didn't listen. In one sharp motion he lunged, not at Rourke, not at the door, but straight toward Lucy, and that was the final mistake he'd make today. Mark Withers had moved fast, far faster than Carrick expected from a man his size. His hand shot toward Lucy with an outstretched grip, an ugly, instinctual lunge, not just of fear, but of ownership. But Carrick had already shifted his weight. The moment he saw Mark's torso twist, he launched forward with a veteran's precision. Carrick's shoulder met the man's midsection with a dull thud, sending them both crashing backward into the small kitchen counter. A metal dish rack clattered to the floor. Mark flailed, trying to punch his way free, but Carrick had already dropped his centre of gravity, hooked one foot behind Mark's, and twisted. They hit the floor hard. Carrick pinned his forearm across the man's chest, wrist control secured before Mark could land a strike. Get off me, the man spat, red-faced, squirming like a trapped animal. You're done, Carrick muttered, voice low, as the officers swarmed in seconds later to cuff him. Lucy was crying now, but not in panic. It was the quiet, hiccuping kind of sob that only comes after a long-held breath has finally been released. Miss Carter wrapped both arms around her and pulled her close, murmuring gently into her ear. Carrick stood slowly, adjusting the cuff of his tunic, breath tight in his chest. The room had shrunk around him. Heat crept up the back of his neck, not from adrenaline now, but from what could have happened if he hadn't acted. Let's get him in the car, Rourke said sharply, eyes never leaving Mark as they hauled him up. Read him every word of it. As the door slammed shut behind the officers, quiet returned like a weighted blanket. Carrick exhaled. Miss Carter gave him a long look, one of tired, grateful recognition, and then turned her full attention back to the girl. Lucy, she said softly. Is that your name? The girl sniffled, then nodded. You did something very brave today. You knew how to ask for help, and you did it in the smartest way possible. I wasn't sure he'd see me, Lucy whispered. Carrick crouched down nearby, not close enough to intimidate, just near enough for her to know he was still there. I saw you, he said gently, and you did it perfectly. She looked at him then, really looked, and behind the lingering fear in her eyes, something softened. I remembered from school, she said. We had a lady come once. She said, if you ever can't speak, you can use your hand. The distress signal, Miss Carter nodded. That's exactly what you used. Lucy's small fingers moved in the air again, palm out, thumb in, fingers over. Carrick nodded. That's what saved you. She hesitated, then asked the one question still stuck in her mind. Am I in trouble? Miss Carter smiled, genuine this time. No, sweetheart, you're safe now. That's all that matters. Carrick stood again, stretching his spine beneath the ceremonial weight of his uniform. The bearskin had been left outside in the car. His scarlet coat was rumpled now, not meant for this kind of work. But none of that mattered anymore. He turned to Miss Carter. Do we know where her mum is? We'll find her. That school card gives us enough to work with, and there are systems for this. It'll take time, but she won't be alone tonight. Carrick nodded once, slowly. Good. Because whatever this day was supposed to be, it had become something else entirely. Carrick stepped outside the flat, the air heavy with London haze and late afternoon heat. Blue lights from 2 police cruisers spun silently across the pavement. A few residents had gathered at the edges of the courtyard, eyes wide, whispers low. One of them, a middle-aged woman with gardening gloves still on, murmured something to a younger man about that poor girl and, did you see the size of the guard? Carrick ignored it all. He kept his eyes on the police vehicle, where Mark Withers now sat cuffed and silent, glowering through the window. The man hadn't said much after being restrained, but that look, that coiled glare of someone caught too soon, wasn't done with them. Miss Carter emerged from the flat, one hand gently resting on Lucy's shoulder. The girl was still quiet, but she wasn't clinging anymore. She walked of her own accord now, staying close to the social worker, but with her head held a little higher. You did good in there, Miss Carter said to Carrick as they approached. Most people wouldn't have caught it, let alone followed through. He didn't answer right away. His focus had shifted, subtle but sharp. Mark Withers was no longer in the back seat. Carrick's head snapped around just in time to see the man round the side of the cruiser. One of the rear doors had been left ajar. A young constable stood nearby, red-faced and panicked, fumbling with his radio. "He's out!" the constable shouted. Carrick didn't wait. Mark was already moving, low, fast, like he'd done it before. He darted across the pavement, not toward escape, but toward Lucy. The moment Carrick realised it, his entire body shifted. Mark shoved Miss Carter aside with one arm, reaching for the girl with the other. Lucy screamed, a short, sharp cry that froze everyone in place. Everyone but Carrick. He surged forward, a blur of crimson and precision, intercepting Mark mid-lunge. His forearm locked across the man's collarbone. With a quick pivot and sweep of the leg, he sent the man crashing to the ground for the second time that day. But this time, he didn't stop there. He pressed a knee into Mark's back, locked both arms behind him, and leaned down close enough to be heard over the gasps and rushing boots. "You try that again," Carrick said, calm but lethal, "and you won't get back up." The constable arrived seconds later, breathless, and secured the cuffs again, double-locked this time. Mark didn't fight now. Whatever had driven him to make that reckless dash had burned out. His breath came in heavy, defeated gulps. Carrick stood, dusted off his knees, and turned toward Lucy. She was tucked into Miss Carter's arms again, but she wasn't crying. She was staring, wide-eyed, stunned, but not broken. "You're okay," Miss Carter whispered to her. "He can't touch you again." Carrick approached slowly. "It's over, Lucy." She didn't speak, but she nodded, just once. And that was enough. The fading sun dipped low over Horse Guards Parade as Carrick walked back through the gates of Wellington Barracks. His scarlet tunic was creased, his gloves had dirt on the palms, and his ceremonial posture, so ingrained, so automatic, was softened now by the weight of everything that had unfolded since the morning. He didn't bother trying to clean up first. There wasn't time. Word had already travelled. As soon as he passed through the inner courtyard, he was met by a waiting adjutant who motioned him silently toward the senior officer's wing. No salute, just a look of quiet urgency. The hallway was quiet. Stone floors, soft boots, and that deep, echoing stillness that made every breath feel loud. Inside the briefing room, Major Collingwood sat alone at the far end of a long oak table. A man of squared shoulders and an expression carved from marble. His uniform was immaculate, his fingertips were pressed together. Carrick stepped in, closed the door behind him and stood at attention. "Staff Sergeant," Collingwood said, "take a seat." Carrick hesitated only briefly before pulling out the chair opposite. He sat upright, not slouching, but not rigid either. He met the Major's eyes and waited. "You broke formation," Collingwood said plainly. "Abandoned ceremonial post. Left palace grounds without authorization. Entered civilian space while in dress uniform. Engaged in a physical confrontation without orders." "Yes, sir," Carrick replied. "I did." Collingwood's gaze didn't waver. "And why?" "Because a child gave the international distress signal. Twice. She was with a man who wasn't her father, and every instinct I've ever trusted told me she was in danger." "And you followed?" "I did." Collingwood exhaled slowly, a long pause stretching between them. "There was a time," he said finally, "when that alone might have been enough to end a man's career." Carrick nodded. "I understand, sir. But it isn't that time anymore." He reached for a slim folder on the table and slid it across. Police verified the suspect had no lawful custody of the child. Social services confirmed she'd been missing from school for nearly 2 weeks. The mother's been located, alive, injured, but recovering. Turns out she'd been searching, reporting the girl missing, but was brushed off due to lack of evidence of abduction. Carrick's jaw clenched. He didn't speak. "Your actions led directly to the recovery of a child who might have otherwise disappeared into the system, or worse," Collingwood continued. "The palace has been briefed. Scotland Yard has already submitted a formal commendation request." Carrick looked down for the first time. His hands were still shaking faintly, the tremor of adrenaline finally retreating. "I broke protocol," he said again. Collingwood shook his head. "You honoured it. The real one. The one that matters when the pomp falls away. Protect the innocent. Uphold dignity. Serve without hesitation." He leaned back, voice softening a degree. "From where I sit, Staff Sergeant, you didn't fail the regiment. You honoured its deepest duty." Carrick's throat tightened. He blinked once and nodded. "Thank you, sir." "You'll receive a written notice for procedural breach. It's symbolic. No punishment attached, but it keeps the books clean." "Understood." Collingwood stood, offering his hand. Carrick rose and shook it. As he turned to leave, the Major added, "You'll need a new set of gloves. Those ones are finished." Carrick allowed himself the smallest smile. "Yes, sir." "Would you recognise the silent signal a child might use to ask for help? Should a soldier risk everything, even centuries of tradition, if a child's life might be at stake?" If this story moved you, drop a comment below. We read every single one. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon pressed so you never miss our daily uploads. Like this video and share it with someone who should know about the universal distress signal. It could save a life. And check out the other Royal Guard stories appearing on your screen right now. We'll see you tomorrow at the same time with another story you won't want to miss.